way we would normally see it here in the Western world. This would normally be seen as Upper Egypt, right? It's on top, right?
Right.
Logically, I thought for a long time that's what Upper Egypt was. It's on top. Up means top.
Right.
However, African view was the opposite. They didn't orient themselves to the north as we do in the Western world. They oriented themselves to the south. So Upper Egypt is this part. This is Lower Egypt. The part that empties into the Mediterranean is Lower Egypt. Now why would they do that? Why would they be upside down?
That's where they came from.
They're in the southern hemisphere.
The Nile.
Because of the way that the Nile flows
Yes, the Nile flows
north.
from the inland
Right.
to the Mediterranean. But beyond that, there's the papyrus of Hunefa that says, we came from the beginning of the Nile, where the god Happy dwells, at the foothills of the mountains of the moon. So they oriented themselves toward southern Africa, the highlands. The mountains of the moon refer to Mount Kilimanjaro in Kenya and Mount Rwenzori in Uganda. Okay. We, meaning the Egyptians, as stated, came from the beginning of the Nile. So where's the beginning of the Nile? The farthest point of the beginning of the Nile is in Uganda. This is the White Nile. Another point is in Ethiopia, the Blue Nile.
Blue and white meat.
And the blue and white meet in Khartoum. And the other side of Khartoum is the Ottoman Republic of Sudan. From there it flows from the south down north. And there it meets with the Al-Haba River in Al-Bara, Sudan. Then it flows completely through the Sudan. That's Tanisi, Tazeti, Taseti, as it was called. Part of the ancient empire, which was one time adjacent to the nation called Meroe, or spelled another way. From that into the southern part of what the Romans called Nubia, and parallel on the Nile, part of which the Greeks called Egyptius, and the English called Egypt, and the Jews in their mythology called Mizraim, which the current Arabs call Mizr or Mizraim. Thus it ends at the Sea of Sais, also called the Great Sea, today's Mediterranean Sea. When we say this, we want to make certain that Happy is still God of the Nile. So they orient themselves into the south. I like to say they turned their back on Europe. And in many ways, we live in an upside-down world based upon where they were. Several years ago, I brought a map of Africa in. I purposely turned it upside down. So somebody would tell me, you got the map upside down. I said, no, I got it right side up. You've been upside down all your life.
Just in terms of time too, they do that with time because they do the prime meridian runs through Greenwich, England, and not necessarily in Egypt where it's supposed to be. They actually changed that.
Increasing.
Somebody have a radio on?
I'm trying to find his phone now. Increasing desiccation, drying out of North Africa causes many populations to move west and south into areas of different topography and climate. So as North Africa begins to dry out over thousands of years, people have to move to be in more fertile land. The social effect is increased sunshine causes some increased pigmentation. As folks move more to the equator, the melanin in their skin takes on more color and becomes a trait that is passed down from one to another. New foodstuffs are introduced, which grow more easily in a more equatorial climate. So now we get yams and rice, corn, teff, and sorghum, other grains. So as they move south, now their diet increases. Yes. Okay. The folks in North Africa were brown skinned as the regular population. The whole concept of a Mediterranean white person was a concept that was developed once Egypt was discovered. Once Egypt was discovered with its high civilization, some white folks could not deal with the fact that there were brown-skinned people there. So they said, okay, they look like they might be brown-skinned, but they're actually Mediterranean white people. Okay. You know, that whole concept has now scientifically been wiped away. And they did have some corn, yes, in Africa. Maize is the term that was used in South America. I'm not sure what the term may have been in Africa, but they did have some corn also in Africa. The point here, though, is as they move from the more northern part of Africa into the mid part of the country, because the climate becomes more equatorial, they now have the ability to grow things, and they find things growing that were not available to them in the more dry northern part of Africa.
Sure.
Yes. Grandma.
Just like to make a switch. Okay. I just want to make one quick comment regarding TIF, and you'll see that word. You'll see that word used here in the United States more now. And some of you probably have encountered it, especially with the number of Ethiopians that we have in the area. Here, their bread, the injera. When you speak them, you'll find that that is made of teff. In Africa or in Ethiopia, it's pure teff, but in the United States, it's a mixture of teff and wheat. So I just want to bring that point up.
Those are all grains.
Yeah.
The first signs of iron use comes from ancient Egypt and Sumer, where around 4000 BC, 6,000 years ago, small items such as tips of spears and ornaments being fashioned from iron recovered from meteorites. By 3000 BC, the period between 3000 BC to 2000 BC, increasing numbers of smelted iron objects distinguishable from the meteoric iron by the lack of nickel in the product appear in Anatolia, Egypt, Mesopotamia. However, their use appears to be ceremonial, and iron was an expensive metal, more expensive at that time than gold.
Mm-hmm.
But the very presence of iron at all, smelted iron, is a mark of a higher degree of development, because the process of smelting iron is not a simple process.
So it seemed to me that if that's the case, if iron was more expensive than gold, gold is expensive mainly because of the aesthetic quality that people put on it nowadays.
Things are usually expensive based upon their plentifulness. Gold was very plentiful. When they first started making iron wasn't very plentiful.
But they had to make it.
Had to make it. So it becomes more expensive.
Just a quick note on value too. Prior to, I guess, the early part of the 20th century, diamonds. Prior to the early part of the 20th century, diamonds were not even seen as being having any value at all.
Why?
Because they were so plentiful all over.
What about right
Southern
now?
Africa. Well, now it is because there was a guy by the name of Edward Bernays, who's known as the father of PR, and he started this whole thing about where the white people who were there, Cecil Rhodes and all of them, they saw that they were these beautiful things, and they wanted to try and see if they could make some kind of money out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they coined the phrase, the phrases, diamonds are forever and diamonds are a girl's best friend. And they put it out there to people in this country and other places in Europe, and made them believe that these things had all this value. And of course, it created the craze for it, and it made people want to get them. And then they of course, just doled them out little by little because they said there weren't that many of them. But of course, they were all over the place.
And there's still plenty of diamonds.
Yeah,
But it's controlled.
right.
That's why you never invest in diamonds. You never invest in diamonds because it's controlled by the Jews.
Diamonds are very plentiful on the planet,
Yeah.
but they control it. So you think that a diamond is very precious. Let me buy her a diamond.
They use that cycle on you.
Yeah, we got diamond mines in this country. They're capped. We're not even trying to get them. Okay. But,
Period on it down.
but I hope you heard what Copper said. They created PR to make people think that diamonds were so important.
That's right. Like do everything else.
Things people don't
The earliest known production of steel occurred around 1400 BC in East Africa, where steel was being produced in carbon furnaces. The Egyptian ruler Tutankhamun Tutankhamun died in 1323 BC and was buried with an iron dagger with a golden hilt. Also, an Egyptian sword bearing the name of Pharaoh Marinpata, and a battle axe with an iron blade and gold decorated bronze shaft were both found in the excavation in Ugarit. So that we know that there was some steel in the area. It wasn't very, very plentiful. Now steel is even more difficult to make than iron is. There are further indications that iron smelting and working in West Africa in 500 BC. Iron and copper working then continued to spread southward through the continent, reaching the Cape around 200 AD. That's after Christ. The widespread use of iron revolutionized the Bantu farming communities who adopted it, driving out the stone tool using hunter-gatherer societies that had been there before, as the Bantu expanded to farm wide areas of the savannah. The technologically superior Bantu spread across southern Africa and became rich and powerful, producing iron for tools and weapons in huge industrial quantities. Now, here you see that there was some steel being made in Africa years ago. Steel was not made in the West until the 1800s.
And didn't I'm sorry, I'm just talking.
What's the difference
But
in iron and steel?
didn't I recall reading in Finch's book, The Star of Deep Beginnings,
Yes.
a whole chapter where he talked about actually they found iron mines in southern Africa that are 43,000
He says
years old.
He says more than 40,000 years
Yeah.
old. Yeah, yeah.
What's the difference in iron and steel? What's the difference?
Steel is more difficult to make.
Harder too.
Only much harder.
And they also have to use sugar in there because the black man developed sugar, in other words, for to make steel harder.
Have to use carbon, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sugar, source of carbon, yes.
So that's why we eat no sugar. It's made to help make steel harder. White sugar. That's for real.
Now, so when you put all these things together, we can organize a whole list of things that Africa was the birthplace of. The family structure comes from Africa. They were the first place to have families. Incest taboos, but things that you cannot do, such as having sex with your own children, that comes from Africa. Rules of governance, we give it a real fancy word now, we call them constitutions. That comes from Africa. The very creation of tools comes from Africa. First tools were in Africa. The first people to live in homes lived in Africa. The first animals were domesticated in Africa. The concept and the measurement of time comes from Africa. When I started studying in school, they talking about Greece and Rome. I assumed Greece and Rome invented all this stuff. Because they didn't tell me anything about anything before Greece and Rome. But now when you think about it logically, the first place where things happen are the places where these things happen. The development of agriculture happened in Africa. They tried for a long time to say it was the Middle East. No, it was in Africa. The birth of the concept of spirituality and religion comes out of Africa. The three major Western religions right now, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are all traced to Africa. In fact, I can be so bold to say that there is no modern religion on the planet today that has not come from Africa. And when you think about it, and you think about, when we start talking about culture later on, you understand that the European cultural pattern does not even support religion. Because the very principles that undergird our modern religions, such as do unto others as you have them do unto you, those are African concepts. The European concept is every man for himself. That don't form a real good religious basis.
All religion comes from spirituality.
Yeah, all religion. and it all comes from Africa. The birth and development of mathematics comes from Africa.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I had an interesting conversation with a European lady in my cab a couple of days ago, and we were talking about what's going on with the Bush administration and who's doing what or whatever, and Iraq war, and so we got into talk. I was trying to talk to her about spirituality, which seemed kind of foreign to her. So she ended up telling me, she said, "Well, people are born evil anyway." And I said, "What you say?" She said, "People are born, we born evil." I said, "No, we ain't born evil." I said, "We born good and innocent." I said, "But we learn some things, you know." I said, "But I don't think we're born evil." And she said, "Yeah, we all born evil."
Well,
And that's what she believed.
that, of course, is that's a very common belief. Goes right back to the story of Adam and Eve. We talked about mythology. I think you were absent that week, weren't you?
I missed the last one.
We talked about mythology. Different cultures have different myths. The most negative myth we saw anywhere, among the ones we looked at, came out of Europe. I brought I brought an example today for you. I'm not sure we can get to it. There's a CD that's put out by a company called The Big Myth. I'll find it in a minute. That has myths from all around the world. And when you read the various mythologies, it tells you how the people think. There's a mythology from the European people, for instance, that says the first, I won't give the whole story, but the gods are getting together trying to make man. And one of the gods goes off and makes man, but he didn't quite know what he was doing the first time around. So he made deformed people. And later on he went back and consulted with some other gods, and they got together, and they made perfect people. But then the story says, because of this, the gods take special care of the deformed. I thought that was very interesting. It showed that gods have, it was a way of explaining why the gods should be compassionate and why we should be compassionate to those who have limitations. That's not the kind of thing you find in the Adam and Eve story. So by reading the various creation stories, and I bought the books, by the way. I'll show them to you now. Who's close to the light? Give me a little bit of light for a second. I brought a number of books today. I'll pass them around. This is called Parallel Myths. A fascinating look at the common threads woven through the world's greatest myths and the central role they have played through time. Those myths are called creation stories. Okay. When you all through it down, give it the copy. I've got another one here too. Creation myths. A dictionary of creation myths. Everybody in the world has their own creation myth. You didn't know that because the one they gave you was the story of Adam and Eve, and you thought that was the only creation myth in the world. No, it's not. When the vice president of IBM holds the patents on he didn't invent the CPU, the central processing unit. What he did was invent the way